First we'll watch the red number 2, who is kind of in the middle of the screen, the red player in the middle of the screen. Her number 1, who's the blue player just behind her, has just picked the ball. So it would be appropriate for her to go forward to mark up the Palomino horse. Or hang out for a pass, either way. So it would have been okay for her to go on either side of that Palomino horse at first, but now in order to go on the right side of the Palomino horse, she would be moving toward her ball carrier. So that is not appropriate. And since her ball carrier is getting in front of her, there's no sense in her getting on the left side of that Palomino horse, because when the ball carrier is in front of you, you need to be between your ball carrier and the defender. So she should either go off to the side, be available for a pass, or check back and pick up the player on the white horse in the back. And she's in the hanging out mode, it looks like, up until the ball goes in. Now we'll watch the red number 3, farthest to the right of the screen. Her number 1 has just picked up the ball, and for her to go mark up any player, she'd have to be going toward her ball carrier. So her only correct thing to do is to hang out, being available for a pass. So now that her ball carrier has gotten in front of her, if she turned abruptly left, she might be able to mark up that orange player behind the ball carrier, or she could still just hang out, being available for a pass. One thing, she's a little bit close to where you'd want to be hanging out for a pass. To be better, she should be another 5 or 6 feet away at least from her ball carrier. And she hangs out until the ball gets in.
Lone Star has it. Dory has the ball. Looking for Robbie. She's off. That one is putting a lot of pressure on Dory. Tessa's there to back her up. Dory's taking her time, making sure Robbie's going to be open for it. And they do a little trick play. Robbie's got the ball. Robbie bounced it.
This time I watched the red number 2. Her number 3 has just snagged it out of the lineup, and she could check back and mark up the orange player behind her. The red team is going to the right of the screen, so if she does do that, she would want to just get up against one side of him facing the goal that she wants to score. And it looks like she is heading for that person, but she is trying to stay between that person and her ball carrier rather than just clearing up one side for the ball carrier to go on. So when he turns around and heads the direction that our ball carrier wants to go, she isn't protecting any side. It's almost never correct to change players, but she could be marking up the player on the white horse in the position that she's in right now. So now, as the ball carrier's in front of her, all the other teams are in front of her, it would not be appropriate for her to mark up a player. She should hang out away from the pack, being available for a pass. And it looks like she is pretty much hanging out now. And then when her ball carrier turns, Now if she would go forward, she could mark up that player, but since the ball carrier is turning, so now our number 2 will be in front of the ball carrier. All she has to do is get on one side of one of these orange players, and she could even go to the left to get on the orange player in front of hers, actually right side, but she'd be clearing that side of the field even though they're facing different directions. And then of course if he went toward the ball carrier where she would have to go toward him to mark him up, she should quit. But she could at this point mark up that orange player on the sorrel horse on either side. And it looks like she went for him, but she did not move away. She did not go forward where she was, and she has let him connect with her and bend her, so now she's having to move toward her ball carrier to continue marking him up, so she should not. The instant she would have to move toward her ball carrier to mark up that player, she should just quit marking him up. And now as her ball carrier moves around, now it's okay for her to mark up that orange player, and her ball carrier this second is behind her, but she's fixing to be in front of her. So as she turns, our number 2 turns around to the right, she should pick that player up and then stay between him and her ball carrier. And she's in a good position there to mark up that player. Now her ball carrier is checked up, so she is in front of him, and all she has to do is stay on one side of him, slightly forward, and be up against him. This instant, she would be protecting the left side of the field. And she's still doing well up until he turns and she turns with him. And now that she would have to be moving toward her ball carrier to mark him up, she should quit. She should actually have quit before she even made the turn, so she should have stayed facing downfield. And she's still pursuing marking up that player and still going toward the ball carrier, which is incorrect. Now the ball carrier is the blue player, and he's cutting over to the other side of the field. So as he's made this turn, now the number 2 that we're watching would be appropriate for her to continue marking up that player that she's already on. But here, once again, she passed him up, and he's turned toward the ball carrier, and she would have to be moving toward her ball carrier to mark him up, so she shouldn't have even turned back toward her ball carrier. Once she passed him up and would have had to move toward her ball carrier, she should have just remained facing downfield and let him go, and then she would be available for a pass. And she does that up till the ball gets in. Okay, now we're going to watch the red number 3. She has just snagged the ball out of the lineup and does a very good thing. She moves away from the pack to get some clearance, giving her a chance to figure out a way to get down the field and giving her teammate a chance to set up. And then the first player on her, she turns away. So she's got all 3 orange players now on her non-stick side. She starts to turn away from the first player that was on her, and that part is good. And then she has a player coming up on her right side that she didn't turn away from, probably got within reach of his racket, where she could have easily turned to her left and gotten away from him just as well, without exposing her racket and potentially running in front and crossing him and or her player that's marking him up. So here she's kind of evaluating the field and keeping her racket away from a defender and passing it off to her number one who's come around here, which is fine. But her turning toward her new ball carrier to try to mark up that player on the Palomino horse is not fine. She should have just remained standing, facing down the field. And when she's actually pushing, or not pushing physically, but encouraging that Palomino player to go toward her ball carrier, and he's going up on her on the stick side. She's really a little too close to be available for a pass, and even if she were riding him off, the ball carrier making the move to go around them is potentially going to be crossing them when he just kind of curves around to head back down the field. So here she's going toward the ball carrier to mark up the player. That's wrong. And then it looks like that orange player is raising his hand as if he thinks the blue player is crossing with less than 4 feet clearance, which is probably true. But and the red number 3 that we're watching has been moving toward her ball carrier to mark up that player, which is wrong. But this blue player is taking a hard turn to the right, and if our red player can continue going straight, should be angling away to mark up that player. However, that orange player has got quite an advantage forward over our red number 3, and she probably isn't going to be able to continue going straight away from him, and is probably going to be pushed to be going toward her ball carrier, but we'll see. Okay, yep, she's still moving toward the ball carrier. Now he's turned back to the left, and she should not turn left to go after that player that's chasing him. She should continue out to the right to just be away and available for a pass, and then he's almost in the end zone where most of the players in midfield are giving up already.
Robbie has the ball, going straight for the goal. So Rachel's not going to let him get by.
Okay, we'll watch the red number 2. That's her, the red player that's closest to the camera. And her number 1 in the blue shirt has just picked up the ball. 2 orange players are in front where she would have to move toward her ball carrier to mark them up. She could stay back and mark up the player on the Palomino horse, or she could hang out away from the pack, being available for a pass. And it looks like she's kind of just hanging out, or maybe going after the orange player on her left. If she were hanging out, she wouldn't want to be so close to that player on the left. But it's not a real rush to get away from them because there's nobody threatening her ball carrier yet. The threat to the ball carrier is on the Palomino horse coming up, and she could still move kind of forward and be behind in a good place to be available for a pass if that Palomino horse caught up to the blue player. And she's just hanging out, and she didn't really position herself to where she'd be very clear for a pass. And both, she's right next to her own teammate who is kind of doing the same thing, where I guess being thrown, if he wanted to throw it back and he put it near them, maybe one of them would get it. So it's not really the wrong thing to do, but they could make a larger area clear if nobody's going to be on them by being not so close together. And as he gets under pressure and would have wanted to throw it, he elects to take the pressure even though his teammates were kind of clear for a pass. And then she does get up and kind of mark up against the player that is appropriate, although she isn't really completely between that player and her ball carrier. She is kind of marking him up, and then he gets in the end zone. Okay, now we'll watch the red number 3. And the red number 3 is the farthest red player to the left of the screen, kind of looking like on the black horse. And her number 1 has just picked up the ball, and he's pointing the direction that he wants to go. And the only appropriate player for her to mark up would be the Palomino player, the orange player on the Palomino horse behind her. And if she doesn't do that, she should just hang out available for a pass. And now she's, I can't tell if she's actually marking up a player. She shouldn't be marking up that player that's next to her, because she'd be moving toward her ball carrier, and she shouldn't be trying to get to the Palomino horse either, because that'd be moving toward her ball carrier. So she should be hanging out for a pass, and to be hanging out for a pass, she should be further over to the left and not so close to a defending player. Here, I guess she's just hanging out for a pass, and that's okay. There was an opportunity for him to throw it, and she was clear, and now she's still hanging out for a pass, and which is appropriate, and stays in that position until he gets it in the end zone.
Story has the ball. Story tosses it in. Robbie is throwing.
Okay, first of all, we're going to watch the red number 2, who is farthest to the left of the screen, farthest red player to the left of the screen, kind of in the back of the pack. Her number 3 is in front of her, has just picked up the ball, and they want to go to the right side of the screen. She would have to be moving toward her ball carrier to pretty much mark up anybody, so she should just hang out available for a pass, and she's actually in a pretty good position right where she's at. If she would just stop, she'd be in about as good a position as she can be to be available for a pass. Now she's kind of hanging out, and the ball has just been thrown to her number 1, who's farther out front, and she would have to go toward her ball carrier to mark up anybody, so she should hang out available for a pass. And her coming out here, angling away from those other players over to the right, like she's pointed, is a pretty good place to be. So there she is going a little farther out, and that's good. And her ball carrier is about to get under pressure, and if he could flip it back if he wanted to. Okay, now we'll watch the red number 3, and that's on the kind of darkest horse, just on the other side of the white horse, and she has just picked up the ball. She's picked up the ball when there is a player right on her stick side, and her own teammate is very close on her left side, where she almost could not turn away at least the moment in the position she is now or before. What she could have done as she is picking it up, if she were in a position where there was somebody on her stick side and she couldn't turn away or move forward, one option is to just put your racket on the ball and move forward, dragging it out of reach of them before you come up with it. The other deal is to just pick it up and immediately flip it back to her spare player that was behind her, waiting for her to pass it back. But her ball carrier, her number 1 got forward of her where she could have turned away, but she elected to just try to defend against, move her racket back and forth against that player that was right on her racket side, and she held on to it, and she got a pass off where she intended to, up to her number 1 out in front. Once she's passed it off, there's really no player that's appropriate for her to mark up at this point, so she should be hanging out, available for a pass. And she is just kind of taking it easy, hanging out. She's not being very close to be available for a pass, and she's kind of close to a defender, so she's not really as clear as she could be. Now, if she wanted to, at about this point, she could kind of turn right and mark up that orange player, and that would be appropriate, or she could go and hang out for a pass. Since her teammate is already up there kind of on the right side, if she were to be available for a pass, she should move a little bit more forward and off to the left a little bit. And she just hangs out until he gets the ball in the end zone.
Story has the ball. Robbie's looking. Story passes.
Going to watch the red number 2, and her number 3 has just caught the ball out of the lineup. It would be appropriate for her, really the only player that would be absolutely appropriate for her to try to mark up is the player on the Palomino horse. Her ball carrier is going to be turning around and going to the right of the screen, and she would have to move that direction to mark up either one of these other players. But it looks like she is going after one of those other players, and that is not correct. Here she's continuing going toward her ball carrier to mark up a player. It's still incorrect. Now she's decided to slack up a little bit, and that's what she should do. And she could slack up and just be available for a pass, or she could be looking back, keeping herself between one of those players behind her and her ball carrier. And she hangs out until they get the ball into the end zone. Okay, now we'll watch the red number 3. She just snagged the ball out of the lineup, coming around the back, and there's nobody really bothering her yet. There's somebody coming up that she may have to deal with, and she has to make a decision if she's going to deal with them or evade, get out of the way, or do something to get out of their way. This is one of those instances where the only defenders are to the right of the ball carrier, and the number 1 is off to the left, and it would be one of those instances where it would be a good time to go ahead and pass it to the number 1 before they get to the end zone. it would be something she would do before that orange player gets to her racket, and she could mark up that player if she wanted, but there would be no pressure on her and really no pressure on the ball carrier, and he's out in front by himself. She actually lets that orange player get within reach of her racket. She still is intent on passing the ball off after he crosses the line, and now she's at a point where you wouldn't want to pass it to him so close before the line that he may be in possession of it as he goes over. And she gets it to him.
Baltimore has the ball, going to the area, looking for Kiki.
Okay, first we watch the blue number 2. That is her number 3 that just picked the ball up. So she could either check back and ride off that black player behind her, or she could hang out away from the action available for a pass. And I can't tell if she's hanging out for a pass or if she's going up for that player next to her ball carrier, but what she should be doing is not getting so close to the defender or to her ball carriers, but staying actually away. And here she's staying away, but she would be better off being over to the right rather than closer to those defenders. So here she's still hanging out until the ball gets in. That's appropriate. Now watch the blue number 3. She's the one that has just picked up the ball out the back, and she would be correct to go ahead and connect with that black player on her left so she can control that player rather than that player being able to keep her crossways to the field. So she doesn't really try to connect with him, but that other player doesn't really try to control her either. Now they've connected up, and that other player may be holding her straight down the field, but certainly is not trying to bend her. And now our ball carrier is in control of the blue player all the way up to where she gets to throw the ball into the area.
For the ball, and is up. Looking for Kiki to get into the area. UK Australia is holding.
Nice, Liv!
Liz is free and is looking for Kiki. Kiki is not open yet. Cat has the ball. Cat is looking for Kiki and taking.
Okay, here we'll watch the blue number 2. That is her number 3 that just picked the ball up out of the back. She is appropriately marking up the black number 2, and is a good place to do that and continue doing that because she can be angling away from her ball carrier and still staying between the black number 2 and her ball carrier. So she's continuing to hold her correctly, except there she goes forward, overrides, lets that player get back behind her. Now to continue marking up that player, she would have to be moving toward her ball carrier. So at this point, she should quit marking up that black number 2 and just kind of stop right where she is, and she'll be in a perfect spot to receive a pass as that black number 2 gets close to the ball carrier. Okay, well here it looks like she's going towards her ball carrier to mark up that player, which she should not do, continuing to go toward it, which she should not do. And if she would just stop, it'd be better if she were facing downfield. At any point in here, she would be better off than continuing up into the pack toward her ball carrier to mark up a player. And she's still moving toward the ball carrier to mark up the player, still wrong. And still going towards the ball carrier to mark up a player. Still wrong. Now here, as her ball carrier gets in front of her, maybe even close enough that it's illegal, and it would be the ball carrier that's doing the turning. But now she can angle away from her ball carrier and mark up that player next to her. So now riding off that player would be appropriate. And since the ball carrier is downfield of her or in front of her, our number 2 needs to be positioned between that defender and her ball carrier. And she does start to do that correctly here. She's getting a little bit behind where she's not exactly between her ball carrier and the defender, but she is still angling away from her ball carrier, so it's still all right, but she's losing ground. And if that defender ever pushes her to the point where she's moving toward her ball carrier, she needs to just stop right where she is. Now, the defender has got quite a bit of leverage on her in front, and now she's pushed her to the point where our number 2 is now moving toward her ball carrier to mark up that player, and here's when she should quit riding off that player. And now her ball carrier is turning, so she's in a position where she can angle away from the ball carrier and continue riding off that number 2, or the black number 2. And she's actually giving up a lot to that black number 2. She didn't have to turn to be heading towards the ball carrier, but she did. And since she did, she should not continue going farther forward anymore. She ought to let that black player go and just stand there and be available for a pass. And there she's still going towards the ball carrier to mark up that player, still wrong. And then right about here, she is passing up the ball carrier, so she can stay in that position moving away from the ball carrier and mark up that black player. That would be appropriate if that's what she ends up doing. But she overrides that player, and now she would have to be moving toward her ball carrier to mark up either one of those, so she should just stay out there away from the activity and be available for a pass. And she started back toward her ball carrier to mark up that player, which that first turn was wrong, but now that her ball carrier is passing her up, going up against one of those other players while she's going away from her ball carrier would be appropriate. And here, turning back toward her ball carrier to mark up a player is wrong. And after she made that turn away from her ball carrier, as the ball carrier is turning away, now it's okay for her to mark up that player to her right. But since her ball carrier is behind her in relation to the field and the way they want to go, she should not be between her and the ball carrier. She should be completely on one side of that defender, freeing up that side for the ball carrier to go down if they want to. But once again, our player overrides. That player turns back, so her turning back to go mark up one of these other players is wrong. What she should do is just stop right there, let those players go to her ball carrier and catch the pass from her ball carrier. So she's moved toward her ball carrier, looks like to mark up a player, and that's wrong. And still going toward her ball carrier to mark up the player, still wrong. But she does that until the player or ball carrier gets the pass off into the end zone. Okay, this time we'll watch the blue number 3, who has just picked up the ball kind of at the top of the screen. And they are wanting to go, their team is wanting to go to the right of the screen. So she turned slightly to keep out of reach of one player, and then turns back and actually should have done some other maneuver before that other player got within reach of a racket and was able to swing, but she didn't move before she got within reach. The other player got within reach of her racket, but she does hang on to the ball. What she could have done is just turned left away from that player or thrown it off to the free player that's hanging out in the back. So she finally turns out of reach of that player's racket. She's got somebody on her left side, somebody else coming up on the right, and her teammate isn't really back far enough to be really clear for a pass. So pushing that player on her left around left is keeping her away from the player coming up on the right. She's able to circle away even though she's got somebody riding off her left side, because they had her too far back, and she was able to control them and go ahead and turn away from the player coming up on her right by bending that defender. So she may have cut too close between some of those players, but she's out in the clear now, and it looks like her intended receiver isn't yet clear, so she has to kill some time. She just gets up against that one player on her left side, which is okay, but then has somebody else coming up on her right, which she would have hoped to avoid, and she doesn't have her teammate out clear to get a pass to her, so she's going to have to just do something else. So the teammate actually rode the defender past our ball carrier, so that was lucky for our ball carrier. And now the our teammate has ridden past, leaving a black player on either side of our ball carrier. And this would be a perfect time to just pass it right up to the number 2. She doesn't do that, and she does hang on to the ball and get out of this situation. So she jumps away from the one. Then now the first one coming up on her stick side, she turns away from that player. That's correct. And she's got some clearance here and moves around, still with no pressure on, and stays pretty much keeping her racket away from the pressure until she gets the pass off. Okay, here we'll watch the blue number 2. Her number 3 has just caught the ball out of the lineup and turned out the back. It would be appropriate for her to either mark up, I guess it's the number 1, black number 1 farthest behind, or just hang out, being available for a pass. And until she meets up with another player, she'd be better if she wants to hang out to be available for a pass, kind of by continuing the way she's going, kind of straight and angling a little bit away from her ball carrier to put her in a position away from all the other players on the field and free and available for a pass. So it looks like she is riding off a player and moving toward a ball carrier, so that was not the correct thing to do. She would have been better off, if she wanted to ride somebody off, is hanging back and riding off that black player that is behind her, where she could mark that player up without moving toward her ball carrier. And she's still getting to the point where she could kind of angle away from her ball carrier to continue riding that person off, so it's getting to the point where it may be all right for her to continue, for her now, to be riding off that player that she's already riding off. So now her riding him off is fine, and I think the ball carrier gets the makes the pass on into the end zone at this point. Okay, now we'll watch the blue number 3, who has just snagged the ball out of the lineup and is heading out the back. As she turns away out of the lineup like she should, she kind of automatically puts that number 3 on her non-stick side, and anybody else defender that would be coming up on that side if the 3 goes down to look for the 1. So I believe that's the number 3 that's on her, which is good for the blue team, but she keeps whatever defender on her non-stick side and controls that player pretty much all the way, or most of the way down the field. I don't think the blue number 1 is quite ready for a pass yet, but our ball carrier kept all the defenders really on her non-stick side, so she was under really no pressure all the way down the field. So here she goes ahead and passes it in. I think the actual call there, I think it was a penalty call for her stepping over the line before she got rid of the ball. But at any rate, that play then ended. Okay, first we're going to watch what I think is the blue number 2, who is farthest away from the camera. I think it's the number 3 that just picked up the ball, and really the position the number 2 is in that we're watching, there's no player that she should go after to mark up in the position she's in now. She should hang out and be available for a pass. So it appears that she's going toward her ball carrier, I assume to ride off another player. If she's doing it to hang out, she should be a little bit farther away. But then at about this position, she could angle away from her ball carrier and pick up that black player that is in the back. But hanging out is her other option, and like I said, she's just a little bit too close. Here she starts to drift a little farther away, and at a time when it would be a good idea for our ball carrier to throw the ball, and she's actually in a pretty good position now to be available for that pass. So hanging out for a pass would have been good. She shouldn't go farther down the field like she's doing now, because it's just harder for her ball carrier to get the pass to her. And if she hadn't gone down the field so far, maybe she wouldn't have had to turn back around. But you don't want to be facing back up field. She should have just stopped 10, 15 yards away from the ball carrier, facing downfield, and just waited for the play to develop, and just waited there facing downfield. Would have been a lot better than the situation she's in now. But where she is in now, she's still pretty available for a pass. So assume she's going closer just to be available for a pass, which is appropriate. It would not be appropriate for her to be going closer to mark up a player. So here she was actually going toward her ball carrier to mark up a player, which would be wrong. Now, as her ball carrier turns, now she could mark up that player to her left. Since her ball carrier is behind her, all she needs to do is stay on one side of that person she's defending. So now moving toward that player, toward the defender, is okay. However, she's not keeping herself on one side, protecting one side for her ball carrier. Then when her ball carrier stops, she could now protect the far side, so the ball carrier could go around to the left of both those players. And to do that, she should just stay parallel to the field and up against that player to protect that left side for the ball carrier to come around. And now when she goes back toward her ball carrier, that would not be correct. Not go toward it to mark up that player. The ball carrier had stopped, and now she's gotten herself in another position where she is in a good marking up position right here, protecting so the ball carrier could go to the right of those two players. And in order to do that, she needs to just stay parallel to the field up against that player and keep that player from getting anywhere towards this side of the field. And there she quits marking up that side of the field, and it's now she has to move toward her ball carrier to continue marking up that player, and that is not correct. She should not be moving toward her ball carrier to mark up that player. She'd be better off just stopping right there, letting that player come on, and she'd be clear for a pass from her ball carrier. So now she's still moving toward her ball carrier to mark up a player, still wrong. And now that she's passed up the ball carrier, it's okay for her to mark up that player by staying on that one side of her. However, she overrides that player and allows that player to move toward the ball carrier, which means she would have to move toward her ball carrier to mark that player up. So what she should do at this point, once she's lost that player, is just stop right where she is and make herself available for a pass. And it looks like she's heading back toward her ball carrier to mark up that player, which would not be correct. So now she's moving toward her ball carrier, which is incorrect to mark up a player. But as she gets to the other side of the ball carrier, now she can be angling away from her ball carrier to mark up that player, and that would be correct. And she seems to be correctly riding off that player up until they get the ball into the end zone. This time we'll watch the blue number 3, who I think is the player that has just picked up the ball farthest to the left of the screen. So she's in a pretty good position here. Everybody's on her non-stick side, but two opposing players are headed her direction. One is catching her on the left side, and then the other one coming up from the right, on her right side. So she should feel pressure that she needs to do something, and she should be aware of where that second player is coming and where her spare player is, because probably the best thing to do would be to pass it off to that spare player before that second player gets within reach of her racket. So she doesn't pass it off, and she gets herself in some pretty much pressure. One player on her left side, another one on her right side swinging her racket. Fortunately, the player on her left side overrode her, and she's able to turn away and get clear of them. And so here she just gets away from kind of the pack, and she does keep her racket out of range of all the other places, of all the opposing players. And then she does something else that is kind of smart. It's where she just stopped, let her teammates settle into position, looked for a way to get down the field, to think her way down the field instead of just crashing and running down the field. So that part is good. And then when the first player comes toward her, she puts them on her non-stick side. That's wise. And then starts running down the field with only a player on her non-stick side. And she seems to keep that one player on the non-stick side all the way up until she gets to pass the ball in without pressure. Okay, first we'll watch the red number 2, who is kind of in the middle of the screen. Her number 1 has just taken a penalty throw from the sideline. When her number 1 is taking the penalty throw from the sideline, she didn't do what she's supposed to do, which is get clear to be available for a pass and stay away from the middle. She actually started marking up a player and is pretty much in the middle also. But now, once the ball's been passed to her number 3, now she should not be moving toward her ball carrier to mark up that player that she's marking up now. So she's still moving toward her ball carrier to mark up a player, which is not correct. She turns again toward her ball carrier to mark up a player, which is not correct. He gets around her, and she turns toward her ball carrier to continue marking him up, which is not correct. Still moving toward her ball carrier to mark up a player, not correct. And she's still moving toward the ball carrier to mark up that player, still not correct. And then as her player turns, or as she kind of gets an angle where she can angle away from her ball carrier to mark up that player, finally it would be correct if she does that. Her ball carrier being behind her, all she has to do is stay up against him on one side of him and be angling away from her ball carrier, which would be going straight down the field. And then as her player turns to go to her other side, she should not be going to push toward her ball carrier to mark up that player moving toward her ball carrier. She should have just stopped, let the ball carrier go over there, and if the ball carrier wanted to pick that up, she could. Or she was in a position, if the ball carrier took that side, she could abandon that orange player and go pick up the orange number 1. And she continues moving toward the ball carrier to mark up a player, which is still not correct, until the ball gets thrown into the end zone. So this time we're going to watch the red number 3, who is the farthest to the right of the screen. Her number 1 is taking a penalty throw from the sideline. She was doing what she was supposed to be doing, which was getting open for a pass and staying away from the middle. And he did pass it to her. Now she's got the ball carrying it down the field, to carry it down the field. So it looks like she was about to turn her racket to that player coming up, but I think she gets her horse turned around and puts her non-racket side against him as he's coming up, and then turns away from him, which is correct. And then the rest of the play, she pretty much doesn't come up with any pressure, keeps out of reach of any of the opposing players, and maneuvers her way down and ends up getting a pass down to her number one in the end zone with really no pressure at all.
Well, I'm back in Dory's bracket. Robbie's at a nice, slow pace on the end zone.
Okay, first we're going to watch the red number 2. Her number 3 has just caught the ball at the back and is going out the back. And for her in this position, the only person that it would be appropriate for her to mark up from this position right here is the orange number 1. And if she's not going to mark up him, she should be getting away from the hanging out away from the ball carrier to be available for a pass. So as she turns around, it's not clear where she's going right away, but now that her ball carrier has moved out towards the middle of the field more, now it would be appropriate for her to veer away from her ball carrier and pick up the orange number 2. And she's looking at him, so maybe that's what she's planning to do. And she's in a very good position to pick him up and mark him up. And since her ball carrier is in front of her, she needs to be positioning herself between him and the ball carrier, and she's in that position now, in the very correct position. So she continues marking him up, still in a good position, and still doing pretty much exactly what she should be doing. Once she passes up the ball carrier and then the ball carrier is behind her, then all she has to be is up against one side of him, and it looks like she's almost losing that side. And if he pushes her where she has to be moving toward her ball carrier, she needs to quit pursuing him and just stop, let him go, and make herself available for a pass. And was kind of getting pushed toward her ball carrier and is still trying to mark up that player. Her ball carrier is turned around, and as long as our person we're watching turns back left and doesn't move toward the ball carrier, it'd still be okay for her to mark up that player. And since the ball carrier is behind her, all she has to do is be on one side of him. And as now she can turn away, be moving away from her ball carrier to mark up the player, it's still okay. And she still just needs to be up against one side of him since her ball carrier is behind her. And she pretty much stays in that position until they get the pass thrown into the end zone. Okay, this time we'll watch the red number 3. She has just snagged the ball out of the back of the lineup and is turned around to go out the back. She was turning early and caught the ball when it got to her, she was about halfway around, just like she's supposed to be. And then, of course, continued turning and went on out the back. And she kind of has an easy job of getting down the field with nobody pressuring her stick side. And there's really only one time when she has to maneuver, and it's more in order to give her number 1 a chance to get into the end zone rather than her trying to get away from somebody. And when she made that turn is the only time she it's the orange number 3 who's on the white horse, possibly get within reach of her racket, but he was just changing sides to go after the 1. He didn't even stop to worry about her racket. And then she continues just keeping the lone defender on her non-stick side until she's able to get up there and get the pass into the end zone.
Line up. Come on.
Robbie's trying to get down. Rachel's on that big gray wall.
Time off, Tessa.
Turns over the ball. Robbie
Yes, Robbie!
picks it up. Passes back to door. Not very confident. Just bounces it in. Throws it in. Bouncing around, everyone's shuffling. Robbie comes up with the ball, he's firing down the field. Passes to the back to Dory. See a familiar play going on. Rachel on that wall, not letting Robbie get in. 8 seconds. And now I'm in. All right. Kiki's running down the ball. Got nice control of her horse. Checks up, bounces on the line. 16-yard throw to herself, picks it up on the offside, runs down the field. Gets a little bit of pressure from the other team. Liz picks up 2 players, and Catherine runs down the field with no one on her. Kiki's looking for the pass. Oh!